The candles in Hampton Court Palace were burning down to stubs when Catherine Howard heard the footsteps outside her chamber. It was late, close to 11 at night, and the sounds did not belong to her ladies or to servants bringing food or linens. They were official footsteps, measured and deliberate, the kind that carried authority rather than comfort. Only hours earlier, Catherine Howard had been Queen of England, the 19-year-old wife of Henry VIII, elevated from relative obscurity to the highest position a woman could hold in Tudor England. Now she sat confined, guarded, forbidden to leave, surrounded by men who would not meet her eyes. When the knock came, it was formal and unavoidable. Catherine answered steadily. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer entered, followed by guards whose presence made clear that this was not a visit of concern but of judgment. His tone was calm, pastoral, and final. He spoke of the king's business and of urgent matters concerning Catherine's conduct, both before her marriage and after it. Names followed, each one landing with increasing weight: Henry Manox, Francis Dereham, and finally Thomas Culpeper. Catherine understood at once that her past had been uncovered and repackaged into an accusation. Someone had spoken. What she had survived as a child and adolescent was about to be transformed into evidence of treason. Henry VIII did not come to see her. He sent no message. From the adjoining apartments, Catherine could hear him weeping, the grief of a man who believed he had been deceived and humiliated. Hampton Court had been built for display, not privacy, and sound traveled easily through its walls. Catherine listened to the sobbing of the man who had once called her his rose without a thorn, who had paraded her beauty before foreign ambassadors as proof of his renewed virility. That grief would soon harden into rage, and rage into policy. Cranmer ordered Catherine to provide a full written account of her life while he watched. She was to write everything, leaving nothing out, with no opportunity to speak to anyone else or learn what others had said. She admitted to youthful improprieties before her marriage, carefully emphasizing her age and lack of guidance, but she denied adultery after becoming queen. That denial was her only defense. Under Tudor law, a queen's adultery was treason against the king's body and dignity. Treason did not require proof of harm, only the suggestion of betrayal. Treason meant death. By morning, Catherine was removed from her household and placed under strict supervision. The change was presented as temporary, but she understood its meaning immediately. She was being cut off from allies, from information, from any chance to coordinate a defense. The women allowed to remain with her were loyal not to her but to the king. Every word she spoke, every tear she shed, was observed and reported. Silence became her only safe language. To understand what followed, it is necessary to understand Catherine's beginnings, because the tragedy of her end was shaped long before she ever met Henry VIII. Catherine was born around 1523, the daughter of Lord Edmund Howard, a man of noble blood and persistent poverty. Her mother died when Catherine was young, leaving her vulnerable in a family that lacked both money and stability. Her father, unable or unwilling to care for her, sent her to the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. This household was large, chaotic, and poorly supervised. Dozens of young people lived there, many of them relatives, wards, or servants, sleeping in shared rooms with little oversight once the older women retired for the night. In this environment, Catherine learned early that attention could be dangerous, and that refusal was not always an option. When she was around 13, her music teacher, Henry Manox, began to show her special interest. He later admitted to touching her intimately, stopping short of intercourse. Whether Catherine understood what was happening or had the capacity to consent was irrelevant to Tudor investigators. What mattered was that something had happened, and that something could be framed as moral corruption. Later came Francis Dereham, a young secretary in the household. Their relationship was sexual, conducted in secret, facilitated by the lack of supervision. They used the language of marriage, calling each other husband and wife, words that would later be scrutinized for legal meaning. At the time, they were the words of young people imagining a future without understanding its consequences. Catherine's childhood was not one of protection or preparation. It was one of survival. When Catherine came to court as a teenager, she brought this past with her, invisible but intact. She was placed in the household of Anne of Cleves and later noticed by Henry VIII, who was aging, ill, and desperate for reassurance of his desirability. Catherine's youth and beauty became political tools, symbols of renewal. She was not educated for queenship, not trained in caution, not taught how carefully every movement and relationship would be scrutinized. She was expected to transform overnight into an embodiment of purity and restraint. Once the investigation began, Tudor justice unfolded with mechanical efficiency. Everyone connected to Catherine's past was arrested and questioned. Servants, former companions and relatives were summoned and pressured. Refusal to cooperate meant suspicion, imprisonment, or worse. The system rewarded betrayal and punished silence. Truth was less important than consistency, and consistency was impossible when fear dictated every answer. Manox confirmed his involvement, providing details that stripped Catherine of privacy and reframed childhood exploitation as moral failing. Derringham revealed even more, including that Catherine had employed him after becoming queen, a decision that investigators interpreted as evidence of ongoing attachment or intent. Under pressure that may have included torture, Derringham said what was necessary to survive as long as possible. Thomas Culpepper's testimony was the most damaging. He admitted to private meetings and to intention. Whether physical adultery occurred was never conclusively proven, but under Tudor law, intention was enough. The law did not require a body, only a suggestion of desire. The stories did not align. Catherine denied adultery. Culpepper admitted intention. When accounts conflicted, authorities assumed the darkest interpretation. On November 22, 1541, Catherine was stripped of her title. She was no longer queen, no longer protected by ceremony or status. She was Catherine Howard again, the girl from the Duchess's household, now entirely expendable. She was sent to Sion Abbey, a former monastery converted into a place of confinement for the highborn. The rooms were comfortable, the food adequate, but the isolation was total. No visitors were allowed. No letters reached her. She did not know who had been executed, who still lived, or what plans were being made for her. Days passed in silence. Christmas came and went without celebration. The new year arrived without promise. Uncertainty became its own form of punishment, eroding hope slowly and completely. In London, Francis Derringham and Thomas Culpepper were tried for treason. The trials were brief, the outcomes predetermined. Culpepper, as a gentleman, was granted the mercy of beheading. Derringham was not. He suffered the full horror of being hanged, drawn, and quartered, a punishment designed to terrorize as much as to kill. Their severed heads were placed on spikes on London Bridge. Catherine was informed of their deaths, ensuring she understood that men had died because of her, and that the system would not hesitate to kill her as well. Lady Rochford, who had facilitated Catherine's meetings, collapsed mentally under the strain of interrogation. She became incoherent, unable to understand the charges against her. English law prohibited the execution of the insane, creating an obstacle to the king's desire for retribution. Parliament resolved the problem by passing a special act allowing the execution of the mentally unfit. The law itself was altered to ensure death. Catherine learned of this decision and understood its meaning clearly. If the law could be rewritten to kill Lady Rochford, it could be rewritten to kill her. On February 10, 1542, Catherine was told she was being taken to the Tower of London. The announcement shattered any remaining illusion of mercy. As her barge traveled along the Thames, it passed beneath London Bridge. The heads of Derringham and Culpepper still hung above the river, decaying in public view. The symbolism was unmistakable. This was not only punishment, it was instruction. In the Tower, Catherine prepared herself for death. Witnesses recorded that she asked to practice laying her head upon the execution block, rehearsing the movement so she would not falter. This detail has haunted historians for centuries. A teenage girl practicing how to die, determined to face the end with composure, reveals the depth of what had already been taken from her. Whatever fear and despair she had felt at Sion Abbey had been internalized and mastered. She would not give the spectacle of collapse to those who had orchestrated her destruction. On the morning of February 13, 1542, Catherine walked to the scaffold calmly. The air was cold. The audience was small, restricted to officials and witnesses approved by the Crown. She delivered the required speech, acknowledged wrongdoing, prayed for the king's welfare, and asked for prayers for her soul. She did not confess to adultery. That refusal, maintained until the final moment, was her last act of agency. One stroke of the axe ended her life. She was 19 years old. Lady Rochford was executed shortly afterward under the same blade. Henry VIII did not attend. He did not publicly acknowledge the executions. Within a year, he would marry again and continue the cycle of queenship as if Catherine had never existed. The execution, however, was not the worst part of Catherine Howard's story. The true horror lay in the months before it. The isolation, the betrayal, the knowledge that everyone she had trusted had been pressured into condemning her, the realization that the outcome was being shaped without her participation. The worst moment may have come shortly after her arrest, when Catherine broke free from her guards and ran through Hampton Court, screaming for Henry, desperate to reach him and plead for mercy. She was seized in the gallery connecting their apartments and dragged away while the king remained silent, only steps away. That corridor still exists. It is known as the Haunted Gallery. Catherine Howard was not destroyed by justice. She was destroyed by a system that demanded impossible purity from a teenager, that redefined childhood vulnerability as criminal intent, that used fear and confession as tools of governance, and that eliminated her when she could no longer serve its needs. Her death was swift. What came before it was far worse, and it is there, in the waiting, the isolation, and the slow dismantling of her life, that the true tragedy of Catherine Howard must be remembered.